As I mentioned, the autonomic nervous system was dividing to the sympathetic and parasympathetic, and the sympathetic system, that the cell bodies that are located in the at the T1 till L2 spinal segments. This sympathetic system innervates structures in peripheral region of the body and viscera. But the craniosacral system, which is the parasympathetic system, is more restricted to innervates to innervation of the visceral only, mainly. As we mentioned it before, each trunk of the sympathetic is attached to the spinal nerve, respectively the anterior branch of the spinal nerve, via this branch, which is called the white ramus communicans or the ramus communicans albus. It's attaching to, or is connected to the spinal nerve, and it's this white communicating branch, or the white ramus communicans, is the route by which the sympathetics are distributed to the periphery and all viscera or organs. So the distribution of the sympathetic system to the periphery and system, it's via a 4 pathway. One of the pathway that you can see in this slide, it's the pathway that it's the peripheral sympathetic innervation at the level of the origin of the this paraganglionic fiber. It is this means that, as we mentioned it, that the paraganglionic fiber, the sympathetic fiber, it's arising from the lateral horn as an intermedio lateral nucleus. It goes to the anterior root, and then it goes to the spinal nerve. Mainly it passes through the anterior branch of the spinal nerve, and then it goes to the white communicating branch. And this paraganglionic sympathetic fiber, that it's entered to the white communicating branch, and it goes to the sympathetic trunk and respectively the sympathetic ganglion. It's synapsing with the postganglionic motor neurons in ganglion associated with the sympathetic trunk, after which the postganglionic fiber enter the same anterior ramus, and then it distributes back to the spinal nerve via gray communicating branch. Here again showing the going back to the ventral branch of the spinal cord, or here is showing that it goes to the dorsal ramus or the posterior ramus of the spinal cord, and in this case, which is the T10 spinal nerve. So it's innervating the motor innervation of the sweat glands and smooth muscle of the blood vessels and the erector pili muscle in the part of the T7 segment. So, and here it's the ventral branch. So here is the same structure, the sweat glands, the smooth muscle of the blood vessel, and erector pili muscle of the segment T10, which is the area of the innervation of the anterior branch. So in this case, this area that it's approximately it's corresponding the level of the T1 till L2. It's the one of the pathway that the sympathetic, the paraganglionic fiber, when it enter to the ganglion, the corresponding ganglion at the same level, it's going back to the same spinal nerve, and then it's going as a postganglionic fiber to the branches of the spinal nerve, the ventral branch and the posterior branch, and also here is not shown the meningeal branches. The second example is that the peripheral sympathetic innervation, it goes above or below the level of the origin of the paraganglionic fiber. It means that the preganglionic fiber, again the same pathway, then it goes through the white ramus communicants to the sympathetic trunk. It has two possibilities. Either it goes above through the trunk, the sympathetic trunk, or it goes down through the sympathetic trunk. So immediately it doesn't synapse with the postganglionic fiber, or it can synapse, but the fiber, the postganglionic fiber, it goes above or below. So it means that this ascending and descending fiber together with all the ganglia form the paravertebral ganglion. So here there are the paravertebral ganglion, the sympathetic ganglion, or the paravertebral sympathetic trunk, and in which this extending the entire length of the vertebral column. So this, we said that the center, the nuclei of the sympathetic was located at the level of T1 till L2, but you see that the length of the sympathetic trunk and the ganglion, it extends the entire length of the vertebral column. This formation of this trunk in each side, it's enable the visceral motor fiber of the sympathetic part of the autonomic division of the peripheral nervous system. Which is emerge only at the small segment, the T1 till L2, to distribute to the all periphery or the peripheral region innervated by the all spinal nerve. So that's why the the sympathetic trunk, this is it's in all over the length of the spinal, the vertebral column, as a two trunk, as a sympathetic trunk and paravertebral ganglions, that finally at the end in the caudal part they are joining together these two trunks, and they are making the ganglion in pair. So it's finishing at the level of the coccyx, the root. So in this case, that's why you can find the white communicating branch or white ramus communicants only it happening in associated with the spinal nerve T1 until T2, but the gray communicating branch are associated with the all spinal nerve. So in this case, in this this passage of this fiber that they are going, this preganglionic fiber, that it's when it's entering to the trunk, either is ascending or is descending down. So it's the below or the above the level of the origin of the preganglionic fiber. So in this case, it's usually it's said that the fiber from the spinal cord at the level of T1 till T5, they are passing mainly superiorly. So it means that they are ascending to the sympathetic trunk, and the fiber fiber from the T5 till L2, they are passing inferiorly usually. So it's not always, but it's usually. So that's why this fiber, the postganglionic fiber, they can innervate the upper liver, the upper level, the periphery of the upper level. It means that the head and neck, for example, or the lower limb, in this case, supplied by the sympathetic innervation, the postganglionic sympathetic innervation. So it's interesting to know that the all sympathetic passing into the head have the preganglionic fiber that they are emerging from the spinal cord at the level of T1, and ascend in the sympathetic trunk to the highest ganglion. It means that the superior cervical ganglion, which is there, they synapse and they enter to the area of the effector. It means that they gain the blood vessels, sweat glands, and the small smooth muscle at the at the, for example, at the upper eyelid and the dilator muscle of the pupil. So this is the second way that the sympathetic pathway, they are not exactly at the same origin of the paraganglionic fiber. They are passing, but they go ascending upward and downward, and then they synapse to the some ganglion, the sympathetic ganglion, and then the postganglionic. As usual, it goes back to the different branch of the spinal nerve, like a ventral branch, dorsal branch, or the meningeal branch. The third pathway of the sympathetic is the sympathetic innervation of the thoracic and cervical viscera. So this paraganglionic fiber, that again you can see it here, it's passing from the lateral horn, and it goes to the spinal nerve, and it goes to the sympathetic trunk through the wide communicating branch. So they are synapsing with the postganglionic fiber, as you see, for example, here in the ganglion, and then it doesn't go back to the spinal nerve, but it goes medially to innervates the thoracic and cervical viscera. So you can see that they are not going back to the branches of the spinal nerve; they are going to the viscera. This is usually it's synapsing with the postganglionic fiber, and then it's exiting medially as a visceral branch or visceral nerves. For example, if you remember, we discussed the cardiac nerve. So it's one of the example of this pathway. So usually these nerves, the visceral nerves, they are joining with the parasympathetic system, and they are making the plexus. If you remember, we had the cardiac plexus, and then they will reach to the target organ, for example, the cardiac and pulmonary plexus. So the branches of this plexus that innervating the organs, the spinal is at the level of T1 till T5, mainly innervating the cranial, cervical, and thoracic vertebra. So this is the third pathway of the sympathetic, the postganglionic fiber, the sympathetic fiber, and finally the last one, that it's the sympathetic innervation of the abdomen and pelvic region and adrenal gland. This paraganglionic sympathetic fiber, again, the same usual pathway that it has. It goes to the spinal nerve, that it goes to the sympathetic trunk via the wide communicating branch or the wide ramus communicans to the sympathetic trunk, and then it can goes upward or downward, and it doesn't synapse inside the ganglion, inside the sympathetic ganglion. It's just passing without synapsing, and together with the other similar fiber, they make the specific nerves that they are called splanchnic nerves. So this splanchnic nerves from the thoracic segments, they are classified as a three group: the greater splanchnic nerves, lesser and least splanchnic nerve. That they are in the thoracic region. We have the lumbar splanchnic nerves, and they are we have also the sacral splanchnic nerve as well. So in this case, these nerves, they are passing into the abdomen and in the pelvic region, and the paraganglionic fiber in these nerves are usually derived from the spinal cord at the level of T5 till L2. This splanchnic nerve, generally they are connecting the sympathetic ganglion around the roots of the major arteries and their branches, and form the usually, for example, from the branches of the abdominal aorta, like a celiac trunk, superior and inferior mesenteric artery. And these ganglia, they are part of the large paravertebral plexus. So this is This is another ganglion of the sympathetic system, which is called perivertebra. The other that it was parallel with the vertebral column, it was called paravertebral trunk, sympathetic trunk and ganglion. But this one is called perivertebral sympathetic ganglion, that they are forming the plexus, and also they have the input from the parasympathetic part of the autonomic nervous system. So this postganglionic sympathetic fiber then is distributing in extension of this plexus, and in this case they are reaching to the organs of the abdomen and pelvis, usually parallel with the wall of the vessels. And the last things, it's the exception that there is an exception that some of the preganglionic fiber in the prevertebral plexus do not synapse. So they don't synapse in this perivertebral ganglion of the sympathetic system, and they just passing through this system to the adrenal gland, and they are supplying the suprarenal gland or adrenal gland, that they are synapsing directly with the cells of the adrenal medulla, and these cells, they are the homologous of the sympathetic postganglionic neurons, and secrete the adrenaline and noradrenaline into the vascular system. So this is the details of the sympathetic and autonomic nervous system pathway in 4 different way to understand their pathway. And among them, the first 2 that we mentioned, it was related to the branches of the spinal nerve, that they are going via the anterior branch and the dorsal branch and the meningeal branch to the periphery of the body, and it's supplying, as we mentioned it again and again, the glands, the sweat glands of the skin, the smooth muscle of the blood vessels, and erector pili in the skin region. So this is the all the fiber and explanation and the pathway of the all fiber that you can find it in the branches of the spinal nerve. And now we are going to discuss about the meningeal branch, the wide and communicating branch we already discussed, and I'm going to discuss the posterior branch of the spinal nerve, that shortly we explained it. I give you some information about them, and then our main topic, which is the ventral branch of or anterior branch of the spinal nerve, which is very important, and in different segment of the spinal cord is making a plexus. As I mentioned, the spinal nerve, after its formation by the union of the ventral root and the dorsal root, it emerged from the intervertebral foramen, and then immediately it gives usually 5 branches. The strongest one was ventral branch, then the white ramus communicans, and the gray ramus communicans, the meningeal branch, that it's going back to the spinal cord and meninges, and the dorsal branch, or the posterior ramus or dorsal ramus of the spinal nerve. This branch of the spinal nerve, after a short course that is going toward dorsally, it's dividing to the lateral branches and the medial branches that I'm going to talk. Before I mentioned that the dorsal or posterior branch of the spinal nerve, it contains the somatomotoric fiber for the innervation of the intrinsic muscles of the back, or the deep muscles of the back, which is called epaxial muscles. And also it contains the somatosensory fiber for the innervation of the dermatomes. It means that the small and narrow area of the skin that is supplied by the paired spinal nerves or from the one segment of the spinal cord. So it's innervating the sensitive innervation of the associated narrow area of the skin on the back, and also finally it contained the autonomic nervous system, the postganglionic sympathetic fiber that is carried to the branches of the spinal nerve, which is also the posterior branch. And it's for the innervation of the smooth muscle of the blood vessels, the sweat glands, and the erector pili muscles that we mentioned. So here it's the the dorsal branch of the spinal nerve that it contains all these fibers that the spinal nerve have it. So if I go further and to see the organization of the dorsal branch or the dorsal rami of the spinal nerve, you can see that they are respecting the segmental organization of the spinal cord. So it means that the C1, C2, C3 till the end, they are coming from the same place segments that they are the spinal nerve that they are arising. So and innervating the area which is the area of which is the spinal nerve pass through. So it means that they are respecting the organization of this segmental organization of the spinal cord. Usually, the dorsal branch of the spinal nerves, they don't have a specific name. Exception, of course, it's existing. So usually we are talking about the dorsal branch of the spinal nerve T2, dorsal branch of the spinal nerve T6, and so on and so on. But we have some exception that the dorsal branch of the spinal nerve from that segment, it has a specific name. As I mentioned it before, the dorsal branch of the spinal nerve, it divided to the medial branch and the lateral branch. Usually the medial branch of the posterior rami or the dorsal branch of the spinal nerve in the upper part of the trunk, it contains mainly the sensory fiber, but whenever we are going toward the caudal part, then you can see that the dorsal branch of the spinal nerve, the lateral branch of the dorsal branch of the spinal nerve, they are contain mainly the sensitive fiber or sensory fiber. So this is the general information that we have it, and also as we said, the dermatome, the terminology of the dermatome, it's the area of the skin that's supplied by a single spinal cord level, or on one side by a single spinal nerve. So they are usually overlapping this area from one to the others that you can see here, the area of the dermatome of the dorsal rami. And also we have a terminology of the myotomes. Myotome is the portion of the skeletal muscle that is innervated by a single single spinal cord level, or in one side by a single spinal nerve, or in both sides the pair spinal nerve. Here, pay attention about the L4 and L5 and L6 that you don't see, that usually the dorsal rami of these segments, they don't have that much the cutaneous branch, and in some literature, therefore, is not represented as a dermatomes of the back. But these dermatomes, they are covering the posterior region of the head, and they are continuing caudally toward the gluteal region. So that I'm going to discuss. So as I mentioned, the dorsal branch of the most of the segments of the spinal cord, or the dorsal branch of the spinal nerve from different segments, they don't have a specific name. They are just mentioned as a dorsal branch or dorsal or posterior rami of the or ramus of the or ramus of the spinal nerve from that specific segment. But we have an exception. The first exception is the dorsal or posterior ramus of the spinal nerve from the segment C1. As a matter of fact, this nerve is called suboccipital nerve. It has a specific name. Instead of saying the dorsal branch or posterior ramus of the segment C1, we say that it's the suboccipital nerve. This suboccipital nerve is mainly to be said that is pure motoric. It means that it has no sensory fiber, or if it has, it's very, very ignorable, and it's not, it's a small portion. So that's why it's considered as a pure motoric nerve that is innervating the muscles of the suboccipital triangle, that it's bordered by the obliquus capitis superior, the obliquus capitis inferior, and the musculus rectus capitis posterior major. So this is making this triangle, which is called suboccipital triangle, and some part of the semispinalis capitis also can be innervated by this nerve. So this is the suboccipital nerve that, if you want to find it, so always is going below the vertebral artery at the suboccipital triangle. Then the next exception, that the dorsal branch of the spinal cord, it has a specific name. It's this nerve, which is called greater occipital nerve. Greater occipital nerve, it's to be said that it's a pure sensory or sensitive nerve. It means that it doesn't have mainly the motor fiber, and it's the sensitive, pure sensitive nerve. In this case, it has a specific name, which is called the greater occipital nerve, which is a posterior ramus of the spinal nerve from the segment C2, and is innervating the skin and the skin of the backside of the head region, that it's continue toward the vertex. It means that upward, and then after the vertex anteriorly, it's the area of the territory of the trigeminal nerve that in next slide I'm going to show you. So again, here you can see the suboccipital triangle, and here is the vertebral artery, and under the vertebral artery you can see the suboccipital nerve, that is a dorsal branch of the spinal nerve from segment C1. The last nerve that it has exceptionally, it has a specific name. It's the dorsal branch of the spinal nerve segment C3, which is called third occipital nerve. The third occipital nerve also to be considered as a pure sensory or sensitive nerve, that it's innervating the skin of the or the scalp of the lower part of the occipital region in the near to the midline. So it's the area that it's supplied by the third occipital nerve, which is the dorsal branch of the spinal nerve from segment C3. Then you can see in this area that the greater occipital nerve that you can see here, it's going the posterior side of the head, and it's reached to the vertex area here. In front of the vertex, it means that the line that is connecting the interauricular, this is the auricula, and this line that is connecting, and it goes to the other side and is connecting the other auricle. So posterior to that, it's the area that is innervated by the greater occipital nerve also as well. It means that we have other nerves also that we are going to discuss. For example, the lesser occipital nerve that is arising from the cervical plexus, which is as a matter of fact, is arising from the which is formed by the cervical plexus, formed by the anterior branch of the spinal nerve that I'm going to discuss. And whatever is in front, it's the area of the territory of the trigeminal nerve, the different branch of the trigeminal nerve, which is ophthalmic nerve, and the maxillary nerve, and the mandibular nerve. So in this case, this area that you can see, it's the area that is supplied the sensory or the receiving the sensory innervation from the greater occipital nerve, which is the posterior ramus of the C2. And in the midline, we said that it was a third occipital nerve. And here is the area of the nerve that is supplied by the lesser occipital nerve from cervical plexus. And here also the greater auricular nerve, which is also from the cervical plexus. But this line that's separating the interauricular line anteriorly, those are the area that is innervated by the territory of the trigeminal nerve. It means ophthalmic nerve, the maxillary nerve, and the mandibular nerve. So so be careful of the posterior ramus of the spinal nerve segment C1, C2, C3, that they have specific name, suboccipital, greater occipital, and third occipital nerve. The other, it's just called the dorsal branch of the spinal nerve, C4, C5, and so on and so on. But we have another exception, that it's supplying the skin of the gluteal region. These nerves that you can see it in this area, that it's supplying the superior and somehow the lateral superiorly, or the a little bit laterally of the region of the gluteal region. It's the dorsal branch of the spinal nerve from the segment L1, L2, L3, that it has a specific name, that they are called superior clunal nerves. Superior clunal nerves, as a matter of fact, they are the dorsal or posterior ramus or rami of the spinal nerve segment L1, L2, L3. This area that it's marked by the number 8, those nerves, they are the middle clunal nerve, that they are, as a matter of fact, the dorsal branch of the spinal nerve from the segment S1, S2, S3. So, which is supplying the medial aspect of the gluteal region. And this nerve also, since we have the superior gluteal region and the middle superior clunal nerves and the middle clunal nerve, in some literature you can see that the medial also clunal nerve also, they mentioned it. So that they are the dorsal branch of the segment L1, L2, L3 for superior one, and S1, S2, S3 for the middle one. We have this blue area of which is the nerve that it's supplying the lower portion of the gluteal region, but it's not a branch of the dorsal branch of the spinal nerve of the segment of the spinal cord. As a matter of fact, it's branch of the posterior cutaneous nerve of the thigh, which is giving the inferior clunal nerve that it's arising from the sacral plexus, and in this case is a ventral branch of the spinal nerve. So inferior clunal nerve is not a branch of the or dorsal branch of the spinal nerve, but is arising from the posterior cutaneous nerve of the thigh, which is arising from the sacral plexus. And you know, and we will explain that the sacral plexus is formed by the ventral branch of the spinal cord from the segments that I'm going to discuss. So be careful, as I mentioned. So then this clunal nerve, the superior and middle clunal nerve, as a matter of fact, they are the lateral branch of the dorsal branch of the spinal nerve, because as we said, as much as we are going caudally from the trunk. Usually the lateral branch of the dorsal branch of the spinal nerve, they contain more sensitive or sensory fiber than the medial branches, and vice versa. In upper part of the trunk, usually mainly the medial branch of the dorsal branch of the spinal nerve, they are more sensitive. So this is about the dorsal branch, and now in this case we are continuing with the ventral or anterior branch of the spinal nerve, which is the most strongest branch of the spinal nerve, and it's is a little bit complicated because usually these branches, with the exception of the thoracic region, and they are joining together and they make the plexus. Regarding the anterior or ventral branch of the spinal nerve, which is the strongest branch of the spinal nerve, and we said that it contains all the fiber. It means that the somatosensitive or somatosensory and the somatomotor and the postganglionic sympathetic fiber for the all part of the body except the regions that they are innervated by the dorsal branch of the spinal nerve. It means that upper limb, lower limb, and anterior and lateral part of the trunk. The ventral branch of the spinal nerve, in most cases, it means that in all segments except the thoracic segments, and in the thoracic segments, the T1 is not included. So they are making and forming a plexus, and then the nerves, they are arising from those plexus. So the only segment of the spinal cord that the spinal nerve is respecting the segmental organization of the spinal cord. It's the T2 till T12 that they are forming intercostal nerve as the anterior branch of the spinal nerves. First plexus that I'm going to discuss is the cervical plexus. The cervical plexus, it's as a matter of fact is the joining of the ventral or anterior branch of the spinal nerve from C1, C2, C3, and C4. So it means that the first four cervical spinal nerve, the ventral branch of those segments, they are joining together and they make the plexus, which is called the cervical plexus. This cervical plexus is located between the perivertebral muscle, the deep muscle of the deep muscles in the neck region, which is called perivertebral muscle, and also it's located between those muscle and the scalene muscle and levator scapula and the splenius cervicalis muscles. So as a matter of fact, it's a continuation of the scalenic fissure between the anterior and middle scalenic muscle. This cervical plexus, they contain the motoric fiber and the sensory fiber together, and they are sending several branches that you can see: the lesser occipital, greater auricular nerve, transverse cervical nerve, supra clavicular nerves that they are subdivided to the three: the lateral, medial, and medial, or instead of medial, you can find the intermediate as well, the supraclavicular nerve. And also they are forming the inferior root of the deep ansa cervicalis, and also it's giving a very important nerve, which is called phrenic nerve, that you can see that they are arising from the segment C3, C5, and mainly the segment is C4. So the motoric branch of the cervical plexus They are coming from the cervical plexus, from the anterior side of the vertebral column, and they are going to the muscles, the deep muscles. Those muscles, they are the longus colli, the longus capitis, the rectus capitis anterior, and rectus capitis lateralis, for example. But the main branches of the cervical plexus, they are the sensitive branch or sensory branches, or the branches that they contain the pure sensory fiber. Those branches, they are arising from this point, which is called Erb's point, or the nerve point, or punctum nervosum, and you can find it in the midway of the length of the sternocleidomastoid muscle at the posterior border. It's coming, there is a place which is called the Erb's point, and from this point they are arising the sensitive or sensory branch of the cervical plexus. The first branch is the lesser occipital, that is posteriorly is coming and directed upward, and it's supplying the superiorly and lateral to the auricle, and it's supplying the back of the head in this region, the supero-posterior part of the head from the auricle, and the segment is arising from the C2. Then another nerve is the greater auricular nerve, or the nervus auricularis magnus, which is taking the fiber from C to C3, and they are going over the surface of the sternocleidomastoid muscle, and then it's going toward the auricle, and inside the auricle, or toward the auricle, then is divided to the anterior branch and the posterior branch. The anterior branch of the greater auricular nerve, it's innervating the skin of the anterior side of the auricle, except the area that is innervated by the cranial nerve number 9 and 10, and also the part of the skin of the parotidomasseteric region in this area. The region of the parotidomasseteric, and which is covered by this fascia, the parotidomasseteric fascia. Then we have the posterior branch, and the posterior branch of the greater auricular nerve is innervating the skin of the posterior part of the auricle and the region of the location of the mastoid process, or the mastoid region. Then the next nerve, that it's sensitive nerve, and it's coming transversally, and it's going anterior to the sternocleidomastoid muscle, and it's going toward the platysma, and it's penetrating to the platysma here, and then it's divided to the superior branch and the inferior branch. The superior branch, it's supplying the skin of the suprahyoid region, and the inferior branch, it's innervating the skin of the infrahyoid region. So those are the important nerve that it has a communication with the branch of the motoric branch of the parotid plexus that I'm going to discuss, and they make the superficial ansa cervicalis. Then the next branch is they are the supraclavicular nerves that as I mentioned it, they are subdivided to the medial, intermediate, and lateral, and they are supplying the skin above and below the clavicle. So the supra and infraclavicular region. So this supraclavicular, they are the medial one, respectively, is going downward and medially, and it's toward the jugular fossa in this area of the neck region and the manubrium of the sternum. The middle one or intermediate one, as you see, it's going caudally to the skin of the lower part of the neck and the clavicle and the infraclavicular region as well, that you can see here. Then the lateral one, it's going caudally and dorsally, and it's innervating the skin of the acromial region, the place that the acromion it's located. The skin is innervated by these nerves. So those are the nerves that they are arising from the Erb's point or nerve point. And as you see, this nerve point or Erb's point, they are the nerves that they are penetrating this fascia, this whitish area. It's the investing fascia or the superficial layer of the deep cervical fascia that they are enclosing the sternocleidomastoid and the trapezius muscles. So those nerves that they are penetrating this fascia and they are going to their direction. What I mentioned that it's the transverse cervical nerve. It's communicating with the cervical or colli branch of the intraparotid or parotid plexus from the fascial nerve, which is a pure motoric nerve, which is innervating the platysma, and this connection of the cervical branch of the fascial nerve from the parotid plexus and transverse cervical fascia, they are making an anastomosis, and this anastomosis is called the superficial ansa cervicalis, which is, as a matter of fact, is the mixed motoric from the fascial nerve and sensitive from the cervical plexus. So this is the ansa cervicalis that is important. And as you see, these branches of the cervical plexus, they are innervating the region of the partly the lateral cervical region and anterior cervical region that you can see. And this transverse cervical nerve is penetrating the platysma here. As you see, this is the superficial section through the anterior cervical region or anterior neck region. Then the important structure which is here, it's the deep ansa cervicalis. Deep ansa cervicalis, usually you can find it in front of the internal jugular vein, and it's forming by the descending branch of the hypoglossal nerve, which is making the superior root for the deep ansa cervicalis, and it's carrying the fiber from C1, and in some literature also you can say C2 as well. And inferior root of the deep ansa cervicalis, which is directly coming from the cervical plexus and carrying the fiber from the C2 and C3, and these two roots, the superior and inferior roots, they are joining together and they make a loop, which is called the deep ansa cervicalis. As I mentioned, you can find it in the content of the carotid sheet, this superior root or the descending branch of the hypoglossal nerve. And this deep ansa cervicalis is responsible for the innervation of the infrahyoid muscle. It means that, as you see, the omohyoid muscle, which has the superior belly and the inferior belly, and also it's supplying the sternohyoid muscle and sternothyroid muscle. Be careful. This is the hypoglossal nerve that I mentioned it, and with the hypoglossal nerve, the fiber from the C1 separately and along with the hypoglossal nerve, it's carried and it's going forward to innervate two muscles separately. One of the muscle is this muscle, which is called thyrohyoid muscle. So this is the infrahyoid muscle, that it's innervated directly from the segment C1 that it's carried by the hypoglossal nerve, and it's supplied by this fiber, not by the deep ansa cervicalis. And the other muscle that it's innervated by this C1 segment that is going along the hypoglossal nerve is the geniohyoid muscle, which is the suprahyoid muscle. So these two muscles, the thyrohyoid muscle and geniohyoid muscle, they are directly and separately are innervated by the fiber, the motoric fiber that is arising from C1 and is going along the hypoglossal nerve. But the rest of the infrahyoid muscle, which are the omohyoid muscle and sternohyoid and the sternothyroid muscle, they are innervated by the sternohyoid and sternothyroid muscle. They are and omohyoid, they are innervated by the branches of the deep ansa cervicalis. And finally, the very important nerve, which is the phrenic nerve, and it's the mixed nerve. It means that it contains the sensory fiber and the motor fiber, mainly the motor fiber for the innervation of the diaphragm, the motoric innervation of the diaphragm. It's arising from the segment, as I mentioned, C3 till C5, but the main segment is C4. This nerve, it's going downward on the anterior surface of the anterior scalenus muscle, together with the ascending cervical artery, which is branch of the thyrocervical trunk from the subclavian artery. It's going downward, and then it's going toward the superior thoracic aperture, and it's entering to the thoracic cavity, respectively, the superior mediastinum between, here you can see, between the subclavian artery and the subclavian vein. So this phrenic nerve, it's the same pathway we have the vagus nerve, but the phrenic nerve is located anterior to the vagus nerve. Then in the right side, the phrenic nerve, it's going on the right surface of the superior vena cava and the brachiocephalic vein that you can see here, and it going downward toward the surface of the, or the right surface of the or right margin of the heart, together with the pericardiaco-phrenic vessels. It means artery and veins that they are arising from the internal thoracic artery and vein. On the left side, so the pathway is the same. It means anterior to the anterior scalenus muscle, together with the ascending cervical. Then it entered to the thoracic cavity, to the superior mediastinum between the subclavian artery and subclavian vein. Then it's here, it's different in the left side, that it's going on the left side of the arch of the aorta, and it's continue again anterior to the vagus nerve, and then it's going toward the left margin of the heart, together with the pericardiaco-phrenic vessels together. So then, of course, the phrenic nerve, it's continue toward the diaphragm, and they are during this pathway. Here you can see that the view from the right side of the phrenic nerve, that it's passing. Here you can see the right part of the brachiocephalic vein and superior vena cava is going to the right margin of the heart, together with the pericardiaco-phrenic arteries and vein, and they are going to the diaphragm here. And in the left side, as I mentioned, the phrenic nerve, it's going and is directed on the side of the arch of left side of the arch of aorta, and here at the left side of the arch of aorta, which is anterior to the vagus nerve, which is here. So this phrenic nerve, it's continued to the left margin of the heart, and it goes to the diaphragm. So on the diaphragm, so there is a motoric innervation that is supplying the diaphragm, but through its pathway, it's innervating the sensitive. They have the sensitive fiber that they are innervating some organs. For example, it's innervating. They are innervating the pericardium on the left side and right side as a pericardiac branches, and it's through the mediastinum. When it passes, it's innervating the sensitive innervation as a mediastinal branches. They are passing through the anterior side of the hilus of the lung. So they are giving some branches to the pleura, the diaphragmatic pleura here, and it's finally they are passing through the diaphragm. In most of the literature, it's variable the passage of the phrenic nerve, but it's used to be said that on the right side it passed through the foramen of vena cava, and on the left side it passed through the esophageal hiatus. So the nerve it's passing, and it going to the abdominal cavity, and in the abdominal cavity they are innervating the peritoneum. So the peritoneum under the diaphragm, and also the innervating the pancreas and the gallbladder as well. And the end branch of this phrenic nerve, that's why it's called phrenico-abdominal branches, that they are supplying the peritoneum under the diaphragm and the gallbladder and pancreas as well. So this is the course of the phrenic nerve, which is very important on the right side and the left side, and compare it with this with the vagus nerve, the phrenic nerve, as we said, that is located more anteriorly. So phrenic nerve, you can find it in the superior mediastinum and in middle mediastinum, but vagus, you can find it in the superior mediastinum and then posterior mediastinum along with the wall of the esophagus as a anterior and posterior vagal plexus and vagal trunk. So the last thing, also there is a terminology which is called the accessory phrenic nerve, and this is the terminology that if they get some fiber from the segment C5 from the brachial plexus, this part it's called the accessory phrenic nerve. In some cases also it can be seen. And about the phrenic nerve is very important because it's innervating the muscle of the diaphragm. So irritating of this nerve, it can cause hiccup in the patient, and in paralysis of the both sides, it can cause some fatal consequence. So in this preparation, I'm going to discuss about the cervical plexus. As we mentioned, the cervical plexus is formed by the joining of the ventral or anterior branches of the spinal nerve segment C1 till C4. The cervical plexus, it's located approximately in the region of the sternocleidomastoid muscle. Is the region that is separating the anterior cervical region from the lateral or posterior cervical region. And this region is the region that
the muscle, sternocleidomastoid, is originated from the sternum and the clavicle, the upper part of the manubrium of the sternum and the medial third of the clavicle, and it's inserted to the mastoid process and superior nuchal line. So that's why the cervical plexus is located below the sternocleidomastoid muscle, and as a matter of fact, it's the continuation, is the superior or cranial continuation of the scalenic fissure. If you remember scalenic fissure here, it's the subclavian artery, and here they are the beginning of the brachial plexus. They call it roots of the brachial plexus. And they are between the anterior scalenic muscle and the medial scalenic muscle is this fissure, which is called the scalenic fissure, and it passed the subclavian artery, and above that the roots of the brachial plexus. So if we continue in this part, we are reaching to the place of the cervical plexus. The cervical plexus is giving the branch, sensitive branch and the motoric branch. Regarding the sensitive branch of the cervical plexus, they are arising from the point that is called punctum nervosum. English terminology is the nerve point or Erb's point. It's located approximately in the middle halfway of the length of the sternocleidomastoid, or the superior to this midway length of the sternocleidomastoid in this region, which is called nerve point or the punctum nervosum or Erb's point, that they are arising the sensitive branch of the cervical plexus. The first branch that I'm going to discuss is this branch, and it's arising from this punctum nervosum. It's the lesser occipital nerve. The lesser occipital nerve, it's coming from the posterior, as you see, the posterior margin of the sternocleidomastoid muscle, and then it's going superiorly, and it's supplying the sensitive innervation of the skin of the lateral part of the occipital region. So as we mentioned it, in the occipital region, we have innervation by the lesser occipital, which is arising from the cervical plexus, and also we have the greater occipital, which is arising from the dorsal branch of the segment C2, and finally in the mid part of the or midline of the posterior aspect of the occipital region, or mid part of the occipital region, is the third occipital nerve, which is a dorsal branch of the spinal nerve segment C3. So this is the lesser occipital. The next nerve that is here, and you can see very well here, it's the greater auricular nerve. The greater auricular nerve, or the nervus auricularis magnus. It's arising from the segment C2, C3, and it's coming superiorly on the surface of the anterior surface of the sternocleidomastoid, and it's directed toward the auricle. This is the auricle, and when it reaches to the auricle, then it's subdivided to the anterior branch and the posterior branch according to the position of the auricle. The anterior branch of the greater auricular nerve, it's innervating the skin of the anterior part of the auricle, and also it's supplying the very important region, which is the parotidomasseteric region. The upper part of the parotidomasseteric region also is innervated by the greater auricular nerve. And finally, the posterior branch of the greater auricular nerve, it's going behind the auricle, and in this case it's innervating the skin of, or sensitive innervation of the skin of the posterior part of the auricle and the mastoid region. Then the third branch is this branch. This is called transverse colli, or the transverse cervical nerve or nervus transversus colli. This is arising usually from the segment C3, and it's coming from the punctum nervosum or Erb's point. It's continue anteriorly, and it's going over the sternocleidomastoid. All this cervical plexus is covered by the deep cervical fascia. So then when it's coming forward and more superficially, they can piercing the investing fascia, and they go toward the skin. So this transverse cervical nerve, it's going under this muscle, which is called the platysma. This platysma, as you see, it's if you dissect it in the neck region or upper face region. So if you cut the skin, then you remove the subcutaneous connective tissue, and this then immediately you will reach to the platysma. The platysma, it's dividing the subcutaneous connective tissue to the superficial and deep layer. And this transverse cervical, it's going to the under the platysma, and also it's dividing to the two parts, the superior part and the inferior part, or the superior branch and the inferior branch. The superior branch is innervating the suprahyoid region, and the inferior branch is supplying the infrahyoid region. So very important connection of the transverse colli or the transverse cervical nerve from the cervical plexus with this nerve, which is the ramus colli, or the cervical branch of the intraparotid, arising from the intraparotid or parotid plexus of the fascial nerve, that it's coming downward and it's supplying the platysma. So this ramus colli, or the cervical branch of the parotid plexus of the fascial nerve, which is composed of the motoric fiber and it innervating the platysma, it's connecting with the superior branch of the transverse cervical nerve that is arising from the punctum nervosum, and it's the sensitive nerve. They are anastomosing together, as you see here, and it's called the superficial ansa cervicalis. This is the ansa cervicalis superficialis, which is, as a matter of fact, is the mixed nerve that it's composed of the motoric fiber arising from the fascial nerve, the intraparotid plexus or parotid plexus, and the sensitive nerve arising from the cervical plexus from the punctum nervosum. So this is called superficial ansa cervicalis or ansa colli superficialis. And finally, the last pure sensitive branch of the cervical plexus. Those are those nerves that it's going or is directing caudally, and it's arising from the segment C3, C4, and it's going after the Erb's point or the punctum nervosum downward, and then they are directed according to their place to the medial, intermediate, and the lateral supraclavicular nerve, or they call it the supraclavicular nerves. Those nerves, they are arising from the segment C3, C4 that I said, the medial one, that it's going downward, and in the internal surface of the clavicle, in the internal surface of the sternocleidomastoid muscle, and then it reached to the jugular fossa, and it's innervating the skin around the jugular fossa and the manubrium of the sterni. So those are the three direction: the medial, intermediate, and the lateral one. This one is the medial one, that it's supplying the skin of the jugular fossa and manubrium of the sterni. The intermediate, it's passing caudally, and it's going to the lower part of the neck region and the clavicle. So and it's supplying the infraclavicular part, the skin of the infraclavicular part, the skin of the middle part of the clavicle, and the lower part of the lateral cervical region. And finally, the lateral one, it's the caudally and dorsally it goes, and it's supplying it's responsible for the sensitive innervation of the skin around the acromial region of the scapula. So these three nerves, the suprascapular nerve, they are passing from, or they are arising from the punctum nervosum, and they are passing over the clavicle, and they are, according to their pathway, as we said, we are dividing to the medial one and intermediate one and the lateral one. That the region, as I mentioned, it is innervated by these nerves, the sensitive innervation. Then the last thing, as I mentioned, the cervical plexus, it has also some motoric nerve, and this motoric nerve that is not seen here, they are responsible for innervation of the muscles of the anterior part of the neck region, or anterior group of the cervical region, and at the vertebra, in front of the vertebra, and some suboccipital region. So these are generally, they call the muscular branches, that they are coming from the C1 till C4, and they are, for example, the musculus rectus capitis lateralis or rectus capitis anterior, also the longus colli and the longus capitis. They are the muscles that they are innervated by this motoric or the rami muscularis or muscular branches of the cervical plexus. And very important nerve, it's arising from the cervical plexus, is phrenic nerve, that I'm going to discuss. Very important branch of the cervical plexus is this nerve, which is called phrenic nerve, or nervus phrenicus. The phrenic nerve is arising from the segment C3, C4, and C5, but the main and important segment for the phrenic nerve is C4. The phrenic nerve, it's coming, and it's very important information whenever you see a nerve in front of the anterior scalene muscle. This is the phrenic nerve, that usually in the anterior surface of the anterior scalenic muscle you have the phrenic nerve and ascending cervical artery branches of the branch from the thyrocervical trunk. So I find the anterior scalenic muscle, it means that here behind it's the scalenic fissure, and which is passing the subclavian artery, and above that it's the brachial plexus. So in front of them it's passing, it's going downward, the phrenic nerve, then it enter to the thoracic cavity, and it's entering to the superior thoracic aperture between the subclavian vein and the subclavian artery, as we said, and it's entering to the superior mediastinum that we discussed, and then it's continue in the lateral surface of the brachiocephalic vein, and here is the left brachiocephalic vein, and here is forming the superior vena cava. So in the lateral surface of the superior vena cava, the phrenic nerve, it's continue. And then it's here, you can see the phrenic nerve once more. So here is in the lateral surface of the superior vena cava, this is the superior vena cava, that it's coming downward, and then it goes in front of the hilus of the right lung, and then it continue on the surface of the or the margin of the pericardium. So this is the pericardial cavity, if you see here, and then it going downward and it reach to the diaphragm, and it's supplying the motoric innervation of the diaphragm. So in this case, the main fiber that the phrenic nerve has, it's the motoric fiber, but also it has the sensitive fiber, this phrenic nerve. It's innervating the pericardiac, it giving the pericardiac branch for the innervation of the pericardium of the heart, and also it gives some pleural branches for the innervation, for the sensitive innervation of the mediastinal pleura and the diaphragmatic pleura, and then it's entering to the diaphragm in the right phrenic nerve. Usually they said to be passing through the foramen of the vena cava inferior, or the vena cava foramen, and in the left side it passing, to be said that it passing through the esophageal hiatus. In different literature is different information. So anyway, the phrenic nerve, it continue to the abdominal cavity, and then it's giving the sensitive branch. It's the phrenico-abdominal branch, which is supplying the peritoneum under the diaphragm, and this area it's innervating the gallbladder. It reached to the pancreas as well. It supplied the sensitive innervation of the peritoneum in this area. It's also existing branch of the C5 segment that it's added to this phrenic nerve, and also it can come separately from the brachial plexus. It's called the accessory phrenic nerve. Also, it's the unconstant and non-constant case that sometimes it will be seen that if the fiber is arising from C5, it's called accessory phrenic nerve. Irritation of the phrenic nerve, it can cause the hiccup and the paralysis of this phrenic nerve. It's causing the paralyzing of the motoric innervation of the diaphragm, and in bilateral case, so it's making the stopping of the breathing. So this is the pathway of the phrenic nerve that I mentioned it, and the right side. In the left side, unfortunately, I don't have. In the next preparation, I will show you, but it has the same pathway, but it doesn't go in the lateral margin of the brachiocephalic vein and the superior vena cava, but it goes in front, or on the left side of the arch of aorta, here in this region, and the both phrenic nerve, they are anterior to the vagus nerve, so they are more anterior and ventrally located than the vagus nerve, and then the rest is the same. On the left side also it going toward the lateral surface of the pericardium, toward the diaphragm. In the next preparation I'm showing you. Here is another preparation that I'm going to show you the pathway of the phrenic nerve. As I said, in the neck region, in the lateral cervical region. So always, if you want to find the phrenic nerve, you will find the scolenic anterior muscle or anterior scolenic muscle, and on the superficial surface of this muscle you can find the phrenic nerve. So this phrenic nerve that mainly is coming from the C4 segment, it's going downward to the superior thoracic aperture that is here is removed, and we said that is entering to the superior mediastinum between the subclavian vein. Here it's the subclavian vein, and here is the internal jugular vein that they are making the brachiocephalic vein on the right side. So if I remove it, so you see that under that it's the phrenic nerve, that below that it's the anterior scalenic muscle, and here is the scalenic fissure that the subclavian artery is passing through this. And here they are above the subclavian artery, it passed the root of the brachial plexus. So here you can see again the scalenic fissure. That two structure is passing inside the fissure, the subclavian artery, that it's subdivided to the intrascalenic, interscalenic, and extrascalenic part, and above that there are the roots of the brachial plexus. So in this case, you see that the phrenic nerve, it's going between the subclavian vein, which is in front of the scalenic muscle, so it doesn't go subclavian vein inside the fissure. So if I remove it, you will see that the phrenic nerve, it's going in front of the subclavian artery and behind the subclavian vein, and it entered to the superior mediastinum. Then, as we mentioned, so it's going on the right side of the brachiocephalic vein and right side of the superior vena cava. You see that here is the superior vena cava, which is formed by the junction of the left brachiocephalic vein and the right brachiocephalic vein, and here it passing to the right side of the superior vena cava, and then here the heart is removed, but as we mentioned in the previous preparation, it going on the side or lateral side of the pericardium in front of the right hilus or hilum of the lung, and then it goes downward toward the diaphragm, and on the right side it's going through the foramen of the inferior vena cava or vena cava foramen of the diaphragm, and it enter to the peritoneal cavity under the diaphragm, and it's supplying the peritoneum under the diaphragm and the gallbladder and pancreas. On the right side, the phrenic nerve, this is the phrenic nerve, it has the same. So on the right side again, here is cutted the phrenic nerve on the left side. It's the same as the right side. So in the initial segment, it passing in front of the anterior scalenic muscle. It's going between the subclavian vein and the subclavian artery. This nerve, and it enter to the superior mediastinum. And then the difference here is between the right and left. The left one, it's going on the in front of the arch of aorta here. This is the arch of aorta, you can see, and it's continue downward on the left side of the left lateral surface of the pericardium, and then again the same in front of the left hilus of the left lung, and then it goes to the diaphragm, as you see, innervating the motoric innervation of the muscle of the diaphragm, and as we said that it has the sensitive branches like a pericardial branch, the sensitive innervation of the pleura, the mediastinum and diaphragmatic pleura, and then the peritoneum under the diaphragm and gallbladder and pancreas. So this is the pathway of the phrenic nerve, as we mentioned it. And the phrenic nerve, in this case, in the thoracic cavity, it's passing and enter to the superior mediastinum, and since it going in the side of the pericardium of the heart, it's entering to the middle mediastinum, which is the heart is located.
Next plexus is brachial plexus. The brachial plexus is formed by the junction of the ventral branch of the spinal nerve from segment C5, C6, C7, C8, and T1. Sometimes in some literature, you can see that they are adding the C4 as well. The brachial plexus, it's a very important plexus and the main function to innervate the upper limb. And as we said that the formation of the spinal nerve is by the junction of the anterior root and the posterior root, that they join together, and by the union of these roots they form the spinal nerve, and the spinal nerve then it's giving the branch as a posterior branch and anterior branch and meningeal branch, and as well as communicating branch, the gray and white communicating branch. So here there are the segments of the spinal cord with the number that I mentioned it, and those are the ventral branch of each segment. So the ventral branch of each segment of the spinal cord, they are passing at the prevertebral region, and they are continue. And here then you can see the terminology of the trunk. We have the upper trunk, middle trunk, and the lower trunk that it's determined here by the red color. And the upper trunk, it's joined by the ventral branch of the spinal nerve from segment C5 and C6, as you see. The middle trunk, it's the continuation of the ventral branch of the spinal nerve from the segment C7, continue without joining with any other ventral branch, and they form, and it form the middle trunk. So it's carrying the fiber from C7. And then finally, the ventral branch of the spinal nerve segment C8 and T1, they join together and they make the lower trunk. So it means that they are carrying the fiber from C8 till T1. So the upper and middle and the lower trunk, they are named according to their position, because superiorly it's upper, in the middle is middle, and inferiorly is the inferior. Then each trunk, which is located, you can find this trunk usually at the scalenic fissure. So we said that in a scalenic fissure, which is the fissure between the anterior and middle scalene muscle, it passed the subclavian artery, and above that it passed the brachial plexus. So here you can see mainly in the scalenic fissure the trunks of the brachial plexus mainly. Then each trunk of the brachial plexus, it's dividing to the anterior division, which is determined here as a green color, and posterior division, which is determined as a blue color. So each trunk then, it's dividing behind the clavicle to the anterior and posterior, anterior and posterior, and anterior and posterior division. So then the joining of some of this division, they are making the cords. So the cord, you can find it at the axillary region. So the lateral cord, it's the joining of the anterior division of the upper trunk and middle trunk. As you see here, they join together and they make the lateral cord. The medial cord, which is here, they are continuation of the anterior division of the inferior trunk here. So the continuation of the anterior division of the inferior trunk, it's making the medial cord. And finally, the posterior division of the all trunks, the superior, middle, and inferior trunk, they are joining together and they make the posterior cord. The relationship of this cords and the name of these cords, they are arising according to the relationship of these cords to the axillary artery. This is the axillary artery, and you see that the lateral cord, it's located laterally to the axillary artery. The medial cord is located medially to the axillary artery, and the posterior cord is located posteriorly. So that's why these names, they are arising from the relation and topographical relationship of these cords to the axillary artery. Then the branches of the brachial plexus. The branches of the brachial plexus, we divide them to the infraclavicular part and the supraclavicular part when is before passing of the clavicle and after it passing under the clavicle. So here again you can see the cords, the lateral cord, the posterior cord, and medial cord. The lateral cord, it gives two main branches. One, it's the musculocutaneous nerve that we already mentioned it about the in the muscles of the upper limb. I recommend you for the motoric innervation of the upper limb, look at the our video of the upper limb that we were talking about the muscles and the innervation of the muscles of the upper limb. The next branch of the infraclavicular part of the lateral of the brachial plexus is the lateral root, or sometimes they call it lateral arm of the median nerve, which is arising from the lateral cord. The medial cord, it gives the medial root or the medial arm for the median nerve. So it means that the median nerve is formed by the union of the lateral root or lateral arm from the lateral cord and the medial root or medial arm from the medial cord, and it's forming the median nerve. And also the medial cord, the continuation of the medial cord is ulnar nerve that we said that it passing below and behind the medial epicondyle. And here, if you bang your elbow region in this area, so you have the severe pain because exactly below the skin it passed this ulnar nerve. And finally, the posterior cord, it gives the two branches. One is axillary nerve that we already mentioned it, that it's going to the quadrangular space together with the posterior circumflex humeral arteries and veins or vessels at the surgical neck of the humerus. This nerve is passing and is innervating the deltoid muscle and teres minor. So, and the continuation of the posterior cord is this nerve, which is the radial nerve, that it goes to the groove for the radial nerve on the posterior aspect of the humerus, and through this groove it passes the deep brachial artery as well. So those are the infraclavicular part, the branches of the infraclavicular part of the brachial plexus. As I mentioned it, please revise the muscles, our video of the muscles of the upper limb. So in this case, you can see the motoric innervation of the each muscle, which are innervated by those nerves that I mentioned it. So here is the same explanation that I said it, that the brachial plexus is formed by the union of the ventral branch of the spinal cord, ventral branch of the spinal nerve that is arising from the segment of the C5 till T1 of the spinal cord, and then they join together as a superior, middle, and inferior trunk. Then it's anterior posterior division, and then it's the cord, and then it's the terminal nerves that I mentioned it as a infraclavicular part. The supraclavicular part of the brachial plexus, it's the nerve that they are supplying the spinohumeral muscles, except the trapezius muscle, and also the thoracohumeral muscle and the muscles of the scapula. So those nerves, they are mainly the motoric nerves and the somatomotoric nerves, so they are innervating the muscles. And of course, they have some autonomic sympathetic, the postganglionic sympathetic fiber as well, and also some sensitive fiber about the proprioception or the proprioceptive receptors at the locomotor aperture. So the supraclavicular part is giving the branch here, for example, the long thoracic nerve is very important nerve that it's taking the segment from the C5 and C6, and it's coming downward on the lateral part of the thorax, and then it's going approximately, you can find it in the mid-axillary line, and then it's going and it's supplying the anterior serratus muscle or the musculus serratus anterior. This nerve is very important during the operation of the breast or the taking of the lymph nodes or any compressor to this area of the thorax, because its course is very superficially, it can be damaged, and paralysis of this long thoracic nerve, it can cause the wing scapula or scapula alata, which is and the patient is not able to abduct his arm above the horizontal level. So this is the long thoracic nerve. Then the other nerve is the dorsal scapula, which is usually is arising from the segment C5, C6, and this nerve is going in front of the scolenic medius muscle and scolenic posterior muscle, and it reach to the levator scapulae and rhomboid muscles, and in this case they are innervating. This nerve is innervating those muscles, the rhomboid muscles, the major and minor, and the levator scapulae muscle. Another nerve is the suprascapular nerve. The suprascapular nerve, they are taking the fiber from the segment C4, or if it is added in this area, and also the C5, C6 mainly. And in this case, they are this suprascapular nerve. It's going parallel with the omohyoid muscle. It means that the inferior belly of the omohyoid muscle, and it goes above the superior transverse scapular ligament, above the scapular notch, and above this ligament, and it goes to the backside of the scapula, and it's supplying the supraspinatus and infraspinatus muscle. In some book also you can see that sometimes on constant case it's innervating the teres minor. So this nerve, it has a sensitive proprioceptive fiber that is innervating the capsule of the shoulder joint. Then, of course, we have the medial pectoral nerve and the lateral pectoral nerves that they are innervating the pectoralis minor and pectoralis major. And also we have the subscapular nerve that they are variable. Sometimes you can see as a superior and inferior subscapular nerve that they are taking the fiber from segment C5 till C7, and they are innervating the subscapularis muscle and the teres major muscle. So they are on the surface of the anterior surface of the scapula they are passing. Then it's the thoracodorsal nerve, which is taking the fiber from the segment C6, C8, and it's going caudally parallel with the surface or anterior surface of the latissimus dorsi muscle, and is innervating the latissimus dorsi in some book on constant innervation of the teres major, but mainly teres major is innervated by the subscapular nerve. So the thoracodorsal nerve is innervating the latissimus dorsi. And finally, we have the subclavius, the nerve or the nerve for the subclavius muscle, which is called nervus subclavius, and it's innervated. It's taking the fiber from the C5 and C6, and according to its name, it's innervating the subscapularis muscle. Those are the names of the nerves that they are arising from the supraclavicular part of the brachial plexus that I mentioned it. So as I mentioned about the motoric innervation of these nerves, that they are the main nerves that are infrascapular part of the brachial plexus, as a median nerve, ulnar nerve, radial nerve, axillary nerve, and musculocutaneous nerve. So I recommend you again to see the video about the upper limb. And here in this picture, what we didn't say about the sensitive innervation, the sensitive innervation of the upper limb, the area that is innervated by the branches of the each peripheral nerve. So it's called the area nervina of the upper limb here, and you can see the area, and it's very important to know the each area of the upper limb is innervated by which branches, and this is very important for the neurological examination, if the nerve is intact or not, by the examination of the sensitive innervation of the skin in this area. So this is the view from the anterior side, and this is the view from the posterior side, and we can start from the superior part. Those are the area that in anterior side and also the posterior side, it's innervated by the supraclavicular nerves that they are arising from the cervical plexus, as I mentioned it. So they pass through the clavicle, and above and below the clavicle is supplied by this nerve. So this is belong to the cervical plexus. But from here, you can see in anterior part and in the posterior part, you have the area that is innervated by the superior lateral cutaneous nerve of the arm, which is originated from the axillary nerve. So this area is innervated by the axillary nerve. This is the view from anterior side. This is the view from the posterior side. If you go down to the arm, so you have then the nerve which is called the inferior lateral cutaneous nerve of the arm, which is the branch of the radial nerve, and supplying this area in anterior side and in posterior side, you can see as well. The medial cutaneous nerve of the arm, it's arising directly from the medial cord. So the medial cord, if I go back here, so we have the two cutaneous nerve, except the arm or the root for the median nerve, which is the median nerve, as we said, that is formed by the union of the medial arm from the medial cord, and the lateral arm or root from the lateral cord is formed. And the medial cord also, it gives the ulnar nerve as a continuation of the medial cord. It has two cutaneous nerve also, that they are arising from the medial cord of the infraclavicular part of the brachial plexus. One is the medial cutaneous nerve of the arm, that according to its name, it's supplying the skin or cutaneous part of the medial aspect of the arm, and the other is the medial cutaneous nerve of the forearm. And here you can see exactly these two nerves. This is the area that is supplied by the medial cutaneous nerve of the arm, arising directly from the medial cord, and here as well from the posterior view. And here is the medial cutaneous nerve of the forearm, that is innervated by the same nerve which is arising from the medial cord. Since I have in the antebrachial region, so as I mentioned it in the video, that the lateral cutaneous nerve of the forearm, which is here is seen and here is seen, it's the continuation of the musculocutaneous nerve that it's innervating the sensitive innervation of the forearm region in this area, which is very important. Before I talk with the innervation of the hand region, you can see here the whitish area, which is part of the axilla. It is in the medial part of the axilla. This is the area that is innervated by the specific nerves that they call the intercostobrachial nerves. The intercostobrachial nerves, they are usually two, and they are a continuation of the lateral cutaneous branch of the second and sometimes the third intercostal nerves that they are innervating the medial aspect of the superior and medial aspect of the arm and the axillary region, and sometimes they are connected with the medial cutaneous nerve of the arm. So this is the intercostobrachial nerves that mainly they are arising from the segment T2. It means that the second intercostal nerve and sometimes also the third one. Then finally, we have the sensitive and the ara nervina of the hand that in the palmar region, so the 1.5, the medial 1.5 finger, and with the palm of the hand is the area that is innervated by the ulnar nerve. So those are the palmar branch of the ulnar nerve and the digital palmar branch of the ulnar nerve that is supplying the full small finger and the half of the finger that it's in the medial side it's located. So 1.5 finger is innervated by the ulnar nerve. So the rest, it means that the lateral 3.5 part of the finger plus the area of the palm of the hand, in this area is innervated by the median nerve, which is called the digital palmar branch of the median nerve. Only a small part of the nerve, which is a branch of the radial nerve, is the superficial branch of the radial nerve, and the dorsal digital branch of the radial nerve is supplying a small area superiorly above your thumb and toward the posterior aspect of the or dorsum of the hand. In the dorsal part of the hand, you can see that we have half and half. So it means that the lateral 2.5 finger and the dorsum of the hand is innervated by the superficial branch of the radial nerve and the digital dorsal branch of the radial nerve, and the other medial 2.5 part of the finger in the dorsal, it's the innervated by the ulnar nerve, which is the dorsal digital branch of the ulnar nerve. And as you see, the part of the nail part of the finger, it's respecting the same innervation of the palmar region. So it means that the lateral 3.5 nail region of the finger, they are innervated by the median nerve, and the medial 1.5 finger of the nail region is they are innervated by the ulnar nerve. So, but after that, we have half and half. So it means the 2.5 finger, it's on the lateral side by radial nerve, and 2.5 finger by the ulnar. Here in the palmar side, 1.5 finger with the ulnar nerve, and 3.5 finger by the median nerve. So this is very important picture that every student must know, about the area nervina of the upper limb and the sensitive innervation of the skin of the upper limb. For the motoric innervation, please look at the video about the upper limb that we were discussing about the muscles.
So here we have very nice preparation of the brachial plexus. As we said, the brachial plexus is formed by the joining of the ventral or anterior branches of the spinal nerve of the segment from C5, C6, C7, C8 and T1. Sometimes in some literature you can see that they add the C4 as well, which is unconstant. Here, if you look at it in this area, you can see the ventral branch of the C5. Then here is the ventral branch of the C6. Here it's the ventral branch of the C7 and C8 and ventral branch of T1. Here, the ventral branches, in some literature, they make the roots of the brachial plexus. You can find them at the prevertebral region, anterior to the vertebral column. They call it prevertebral region. Then it's passing through the scolenic fissure, if you remember, through the scolenic fissure, which is between the anterior scolenic muscle and middle scolenic muscle. It passed the subclavian artery that we divide the subclavian artery according to the subclavian, the scolenic fissure, to the intrascolenic part, interscolenic part, and extrascolenic part. And above the, which is passing here, above the subclavian artery, then it passed the trunk of the brachial plexus. So the trunk of the brachial plexus, we have three: superior trunk, middle trunk, and inferior trunk. The superior trunk is forming by junction of the ventral branch of the spinal nerve segment C5 together with the ventral branch of the segment C6, if it was C4 also in this case. So they make the superior trunk. The ventral branch of the segment C7, it continues without joining of anything and is forming the middle trunk. The ventral branch of the segment C8 and T1, here and here, they join together and they make the inferior trunk. So the position of the trunk according to their location. So superior trunk is the highest one, middle trunk is in the middle, and inferior trunk is in the inferior side. And usually you can find them, of course it's variable, but usually you can find it at the scolenic fissure between the anterior and middle scolenic muscle. Then if we further we go, here as you see, here's the clavicle. The clavicle, it's cutted here, so the clavicle was passing like this time. And behind the clavicle, this superior, middle, and inferior trunk, they are giving the divisions. Sometimes they are called divisions, sometimes they call it branches. So we are using the terminology of the divisions. Each trunk, it gives the anterior division and posterior division. Here, the superior trunk, it gives the anterior division, then posterior division. The middle trunk, it gives the anterior division and the posterior division. The inferior trunk, it gives the anterior division, and here you can see the posterior division. So these divisions that you can find it immediately behind the clavicle. The anterior division of the superior trunk together with the anterior division of the middle trunk here, they joined together and they make the cord, and this cord they are located at the axilla. This is called lateral cord. So anterior division of the superior trunk that was receiving the impulse from C5, C6 plus the anterior division of the C7, they form the lateral cord. The anterior division of the inferior trunk, it continue without joining of anything, and it's making the middle cord or medial cord, medial cord. The middle trunk, it's making the medial cord. And finally, the posterior division of all this trunk, superior trunk, middle trunk and inferior trunk, they are giving the posterior division, which is forming the posterior cord. Just connected here. So here it's the posterior cord. The position of the cord that I am talking is formed according to the position of this artery, which is called axillary artery. So the position of the cord here, I arrange the correct position. So here is the pathway of the axillary artery. Lateral to the axillary artery, it's lateral cord. Medial to the axillary artery is medial cord. And posterior to the axillary artery, here is posterior cord. Yes? So the position of the cord is according to the pathway of the axillary artery. The position of the trunk is according to their location, superior, middle, and inferior, and the position of the cord according to the pathway of the axillary artery, lateral to that lateral cord, medial to that is medial cord, and the posterior to that is the posterior cord. Now, each cord that they are passing through the axilla, it gives some branches, which are the main branches of the brachial plexus, and they are considered as the infraclavicular part of the brachial plexus. Because if you see here, the clavicle, the passage of the brachial plexus behind the clavicle, what is above the clavicle, we have the supraclavicular part of the brachial plexus, and what is behind, below, it's called the infraclavicular part of the brachial plexus. Before I start with the infra, so I just mentioned some important nerves that from the supraclavicular part of the brachial plexus. One of them that you can see here is this nerve. As you see, it's the supraclavicular part of the brachial plexus. It's giving this nerve, which is called suprascapular nerve. This suprascapular nerve, it's passing usually along the omohyoid, the inferior belly of the omohyoid muscle, and it's directed toward this part. Definitely you remember, this is the ligament which is called transverse the transverse ligament of the scapula, the superior transverse of the scapula here, or the ligamentum transversum scapula superius, which is below that. It's making a bridge above the scapular notch, and in this case you have this foramen, and it's passing below this ligament, the superior transverse scapular ligament of the scapula, and it goes posteriorly and it enters to the supraspinal and infraspinal fossa. And in this case, it's innervating the supraspinatus muscle and infraspinatus muscle. In some literature, in unconstant case, you can see that it's innervating the teres minor, but teres minor it's mainly innervated by the axillary nerve that we are going to discuss. So this is the suprascapular. And usually the supraclavicular part of the branches of the supraclavicular part of the brachial plexus, they are motoric and they have some proprioception or proprioceptive fiber, the sensitive fiber. It means that, for example, the suprascapular nerve, so it has some sensitive fiber for the capsule of the shoulder joint. So this is one branch that we have it. Next branch that I wanted to show you is this branch, this nerve. This nerve is called thoracicus longus, nervus thoracicus longus, or long thoracic nerve. It's going on the lateral side of the thorax, and then it's going approximately at the middle axillary line or mid axillary line. And it's going over the muscle which is here is called serratus anterior and is innervating the serratus anterior muscle. So this nerve is very important nerve and is passing very superficially here on the surface of the serratus anterior muscle. And for example, during some pressure or during the surgery of the breast, for example, to remove the lymph nodes, so sometimes it will be traumatized, and traumatized of this nerve or paralyzing of this nerve, it's making the paralyze of the serratus anterior muscle, and we have a special terminology which is called wing scapula. The scapula, it looks like a wing shape, and also the patient is not able to do the abduction of the arm above the horizontal level, which is the function of the serratus anterior muscle. So scapula alata or the wing scapula, it's by the paralyzing of the long thoracic nerve, which is a part of the supraclavicular part of the brachial plexus. Another nerve that I see here, it's this nerve. This nerve that it's directed toward this muscle, which is called latissimus dorsi. It's the thoracodorsal nerve. And this thoracodorsal nerve, it's passing through the internal surface of and it goes to the internal surface of the latissimus dorsi, and is innervating the latissimus dorsi, and sometimes also in some literature that you can see that it's innervating the tres major, but it's unconstant and it's very rare. So this is another nerve about the supraclavicular part of the brachial plexus. So if I see another nerve here, there is one nerve that is going directly toward the anterior part of the surface of the scapula, which is feeling, this muscle is feeling the subscapular fossa, and in this case this nerve is called subscapular nerve. This subscapular nerve, it has a variable level that is coming from the supraclavicular part of the scapula of the brachial plexus, supraclavicular part, and it's passing and is innervating the subscapular muscle and also the tres major. This is the major innervation of the tres major and subscapular muscle by the subscapular nerve. That it has the variable, it can be one or two or three nerve that it's innervating these two muscles, the subscapular and the tres major muscle, which is here. Another nerves of the supraclavicular part, they are the nerve that they are supplying this muscle. This is called pectoralis major, which is, you can see that from the thoracic region it going to the crest of the greater tubercle here, And if I remove it, so we have under that another muscle which is smaller and is attaching, inserting to the coracoid process of the scapula is the teres minor. It's the pectoralis minor. And this pectoralis minor and pectoralis major, they are innervated by the pectoral nerve, the medial and lateral pectoral nerves, that they are arising also from the supraclavicular part of the brachial plexus. We have two more nerves that it's arising from the supraclavicular part of the brachial plexus, that here we don't have one. It's the subclavian, the nerve for the subclavius muscle. It's very thin nerve that it's going under the clavicle, and it's entering to the subclavius muscle and is innervating it. And this is one nerve, and the other nerve that is important and it's going dorsally. It's the dorsalis scapulae nerve, the nervus dorsalis scapulae, or dorsal scapular nerve. It's very thin nerve also from the supraclavicular part that it passes anterior to the scalenus, middle scalenic muscle and the posterior scalenic muscle, and it goes toward the levator scapulae muscle and is innervating two muscles. This dorsal scapular nerve is innervating the levator scapulae muscle, which is attaching to the superior angle of the scapula, and also the rhomboid muscles that they are the muscles of the back. So those are the nerves of the supraclavicular. And as you see, the supraclavicular part of the brachial plexus, they are mainly motoric, and they are responsible for the innervation of the muscle of the spinohumeral muscles and thoracohumeral muscles and the muscles of the scapula. So those are the nerves. And then now back to the infraclavicular part of the brachial plexus. As we mentioned it, just for your refreshing of your memory, we said that here is the C5, the ventral branch of the C6. They are making the superior trunk. Here is the continuum of the ventral branch of the C7, and here is the ventral branch of the C8 and ventral branch of T1 that they are making the inferior trunk. So here we had the trunk, the superior trunk, middle trunk, and inferior trunk. The superior trunk and middle and inferior, they are making the division, the anterior division of superior trunk and the anterior division of the middle trunk. They form this cord, which is located lateral to the axillary artery. Is called lateral cord, as you see. And this lateral cord, further in infraclavicular part of the brachial plexus, it gives two branches. One branch which is here, and it goes to the anterior compartment of the muscles of the arm and is going toward the coracobrachialis muscle. Is piercing the coracobrachialis muscle, and it goes between the biceps brachii and brachialis muscle, and it's motoric innervating the muscle of the anterior compartment of the arm, and this is called musculocutaneous nerve. The musculocutaneous nerve then in forearm, it continue as a lateral cutaneous nerve of the forearm. And this is the branch, the sensitive branch of the musculocutaneous nerve. I advise you to revise the video about the muscles of the upper limb as well. The next branch that is coming from the lateral cord is this one, and here is the lateral arm, or lateral root also sometimes they call it, of the lateral cord, and it's forming the part of the median nerve that I'm going to discuss. So this is the two main branch of the lateral cord that is formed by the junction of the anterior division of the superior trunk and anterior division of the middle trunk here. Then we have the inferior trunk. Inferior trunk, the anterior division, it's continue and it's making the medial cord. Medial cord, we call it because it's located medial to the axillary artery here, medial cord. The medial cord, it gives the medial arm or medial root for the formation of the median nerve. So as you see, the median nerve is formed by the lateral arm branch of the lateral cord and the medial arm branch of the medial cord. They form together, they make this form of the fork shape structure. This is very important for recognizing the brachial plexus and median nerve, and here is the median nerve. Again, the median nerve, we mentioned that it's innervating the muscles that refer to the video of the upper limb, and also it has the sensitive, it's the nerve that it passed through the carpal tunnel, and it's innervating the palmar surface of the lateral 3.5 side of the finger in the palmar side, and also the nail part of the dorsal part of the lateral 3.5 side of the finger that it's explained in the theoretical part. So, another branch of the medial trunk, medial cord, it's these two small cutaneous nerves. They are the medial cutaneous nerve of the arm and medial cutaneous nerve of the forearm. According to its name, we have they are the sensitive nerve, they are the pure sensitive nerve, and they are innervating according to their name, the medial part of the arm and the medial part of the forearm. Medial cutaneous nerve of the arm and medial cutaneous nerve of the forearm. And finally, the continuation of the medial cord, as is here, continuation is the ulnar nerve. Ulnar nerve, we already discussed that it's passing and is innervating the muscles, referring to the video of the muscles of the upper limb, and it goes on the groove for the ulnar nerve below and behind the medial epicondyle. This is the part that it's giving painful if you hit your elbow region in this area, and then it continues and it goes over the carpal tunnel. It doesn't go to the carpal tunnel, and finally it's innervating the sensitive innervation of the medial 1.5 finger of the palmar side, and the dorsal, on the dorsal part of the hand, the medial 2.5 part of the finger, the skin, the sensitive innervation that is discussed in the theory. So here we have the medial cord, the lateral cord, and the medial cord, and the branches of this cord, and then we are going behind the axilla. If we remove it, behind the axilla you can see the posterior cord. As I said, the posterior cord is formed by the junction of the posterior division of all the trunks. So here you have the superior trunk that it gives the posterior division. Here is the middle trunk that it gives the posterior division, and here is the inferior trunk that it gives the posterior division. All these three posterior division from all these three trunks, they are making the posterior cord that is located behind the axillary artery. That's why they call it posterior cord. And posterior cord, it gives very important branch which is here, and it's called axillary nerve. And as you see, the axillary nerve is going to the humerotricipital space or they call it quadrangular space. This quadrangular space is bordered by the tres minor superiorly, tres major inferiorly, and the long head of the triceps from the posterior view, it's much more better seen, of the triceps muscle and the humerus. So this is called the quadrangular space, or it's called the humerotricipital space, and this is the place that the axillary nerve is passing together with this artery, which is called the posterior circumflex humeral artery. The posterior circumflex artery of the humerus, together with the axillary artery, it's turning at the surgical neck of the humerus, and it going and is innervating the deltoid muscle, this muscle, and also the pectoralis minor muscle is innervated by the axillary nerve. The axillary nerve also, as we've said, is innervating the skin of the shoulder region, and also the skin of the lateral superior part of the lateral part of the arm that we already mentioned it. And then finally the posterior cord, it's continue. The stronger branch than axillary is this branch, which is called radial nerve, and radial nerve is passing, as we mentioned it also in the video of the upper limb, it passing to the groove for the radial nerve that is between at the humerus and the posterior surface of the humerus. And it's between the medial and lateral head of the triceps brachial muscle, and it continue with the artery which is called deep brachial artery. There are these two structures that they are passing through the groove for the radial artery at the posterior surface of the humerus, and is supplying the muscles that we already mentioned it in the video of the upper limb, and the sensitive branch that it's giving or supplying the skin of the inferior and lateral part of the arm, and also the skin of the dorsum of the hand at the the lateral 2.5 part of the finger. It's innervated, that we already discussed the area of the sensitive innervation of the radial nerve. The motoric innervation is already discussed at the video of the muscles of the upper limb. So very important. So that's all about the brachial plexus that already we mentioned it. Of course, you have to know the segments that they are arising, each nerve, the important nerve, mainly the infraclavicular part. You have to know that they are arising from which segment. This is for the neurological examination, is very important. And at the dissection or any picture, it's important to recognize which nerve it is. So I recommend you, the most important is that to find the median nerve. So if you find a median nerve, then you continue up, you will see this V-shape or fork-shaped structure. This is it's the lateral arm that is arising from the lateral cord, and in this case you can recognize that the lateral cord, it gives also the musculocutaneous nerve. The other medial arm is this arm that it's arising from the medial cord, and when you find the medial cord, you know that it's giving the cutaneous branch, the medial cutaneous branch of the arm, and medial cutaneous branch of the forearm, and also it continues as a ulnar nerve. And finally, when you find this lateral cord and medial cord, and you remove it, and you will reach behind the axilla, the posterior cord, and posterior cord, it gives the axillary nerve that we already mentioned it. It goes to the humerotricipital together with the posterior circumflex artery of the humerus, and the continuation, the radial nerve that is going to the groove for the radial nerve in posterior part of the humerus together with the deep brachial artery. So the key for the recognizing of the brachial plexus is median nerve that is passing in the midpoint of the arm, and in this case with this two V-shaped structure you can see laterally lateral cord, medially medial cord, posteriorly posterior cord. So the anterior branch of the spinal nerve from the segment of the thoracic region, the thoracic segments, except the T1, so they are respecting the segmental organization of the spinal cord. They are the anterior branch of the spinal nerve from the segment T1 till T11. It's called the intercostal nerve, that they are continue to the corresponding the intercostal space between the posterior intercostal membrane and the parietal pleura. The last one that it's under the 12th rib, it's located, it's called the subcostal nerve. It's not called intercostal nerve, so it's called subcostal nerve because it's passing under the 12 ribs, so that's why it's called subcostal nerve together with the subcostal vessels. So the intercostal nerve from the segment T1, it's taking part, as we said, as a part of the root for the brachial plexus that we already mentioned it. So it's taking part for the for the innervation of the upper limb and also the thorax as well. It's continue for the in the first intercostal space, and then it's innervating a small area of the cutaneous part of the or skin part of the thorax. So the anterior cutaneous branch usually for the first one is missing, and rarely giving also the lateral cutaneous branch, this first intercostal nerve, which is arising from the segment C1. Then the intercostal nerve, they are passing through the intercostal space. We said that the corresponding space between the internal intercostal and inner intercostal muscle, and the pathway, it's in the intercostal space, it's from the superior is intercostal vein that I have it in my pin set. Under that is posterior intercostal artery, and finally the most lower part or structure is the intercostal nerve. So one VAN from the superior to inferior is the structure that from superior to inferior there are first vein and then artery, and then there is a nerve, intercostal nerve. So and always it's this nerve in the beginning, it's at the back side in intercostal space. It's between the posterior intercostal membrane and parietal pleura, and then when it goes forward, it's continue forward. It's going between in the costal groove between the internal and innermost intercostal muscle. As we said it, the first 6 intercostal nerves, they are innervating the nearby intercostal muscles, and also they have the cutaneous innervation of the thoracic wall. That's why also they are supplying the parietal pleura of the thoracic cavity. Be careful, the visceral pleura, it's innervated by the course of the autonomic nervous system. So that's why if there is a injury to the anterior wall of or inner part of the wall of the thoracic cavity and the parietal pleura, so the pain, it's appearing in the same segment or the area of the passage of the intercostal nerve. but the damage to the visceral visceral pleura, it doesn't respect this segmental organization. So this first 6 intercostal nerves, they are giving their usual the anterior cutaneous branch that is innervating the skin near to the midline of the thorax or chest region, and the lower intercostal nerves, they are leaving the intercostal space anteriorly, and after giving the branches to the intercostal muscles and abdominal muscle, which is mainly they are supplying the rectus abdominis. So they are innervating the sensory innervation of the skin near to their origin. So the last 5 intercostal nerves from 7 till 12, or sometimes 6 till 12, so they are innervating the abdominal muscle and the abdominal, the skin of the abdominal region. So each in the abdominal region, instead of the innermost and internal intercostal muscle, the course of the nerve, they are passing between the internal oblique abdominal muscle and transversalis muscle. They are passing through this area. And this first, each intercostal nerve, the typical intercostal nerve, they are usually giving the lateral branch, which is on the lateral part. It means in the midpoint of the vertebral column and sternum. So in the lateral region, it gives the lateral cutaneous nerve, which is then further is divided to the anterior and posterior. The posterior one, it goes to the back side and is innervating the muscle and the skin of the back, and anterior side it goes the skin, not the muscle, it's cutaneous, so it's going the skin of the back side, and the anterior division of the lateral cutaneous nerve of the branch of the intercostal nerve is going forward toward the sternum. Then the lateral cutaneous nerve of the lateral cutaneous branch of the first intercostal nerve, as we said, that is rarely is formed, and the lateral cutaneous nerve of the second intercostal nerve, as we mentioned it, in the brachial plexus and in the sensitive innervation of the upper limb. So they are taking part to the innervation of the axillary region or medial side of the upper part of the arm, that is connected with the medial cutaneous nerve of the arm that is coming from the medial cord, and it's forming the intercostobrachial nerve. So in some literature you can see also mainly it's coming from the second intercostal nerve, but also it can be a lateral cutaneous nerve from the third one as well in some variation. Then another important is that the intercostal nerve in the lower part, it's also is innervating the peritoneum, so there are sensitive innervation of the peritoneum. The other information is that the intercostal nerve, they are responsible for the innervation of the breast, the sensitive innervation of the breast. It means that from the 4th till 6th intercostal nerves, they are their lateral cutaneous branch and anterior branch, they are supplying the area of the breast, that they have sensory innervation, and also they are receiving the autonomic innervation. This is the sympathetic trunk and the ganglion that you can see in the posterior mediastinum, that is seen, and they are located all this structure that I mentioned it. So they are receiving also the autonomic nerve fibers as well. The breast also, they are receiving the sensitive innervation also from the supraclavicular nerves that they are coming from the cervical plexus, and they go innervating the infraclavicular part of the thorax together with the upper part of the breast as well. So in this preparation, since I can show you very nice the passage of the phrenic nerve, that it passing over the scolenic anterior or anterior scolenic muscle, and it's going downward, and in the superior mediastinum, then in the middle mediastinum, then it's ending to the diaphragm. And the phrenic nerve is more anteriorly located, and here is the vagus nerve that it's going more posteriorly. It means that in entering the same course of the phrenic nerve between the subclavian vein and artery, but then the vagus, it goes toward posteriorly to the posterior mediastinum that you can see here, that it goes toward the posterior mediastinum, toward the esophagus, and they make the anterior and posterior vagal trunk. The right vagus goes posteriorly, and left vagus goes anteriorly. They make the anterior posterior vagal trunk. So this is about the intercostal nerves that are in addition of the lateral cutaneous branch that is divided to the anterior and posterior division or branches. Then we have nearby the sternum and anterior part. They have the anterior cutaneous nerve that they are supplying the skin at the mid anterior part and the middle of the trunk in the thoracic region and abdominal region. So, recapitulation, the first two nerves, the intercostal nerves, they are taking part for the innervation of the upper limb as well as thorax. Then the first six, they are responsible for the innervation of the wall of the thorax. And the last five intercostal nerves, they are innervating the wall of the thorax as well as abdomen. So the fifth intercostal space is the seventh intercostal space is approximately at the level of the xiphoid process of the sternum. For your orientation, the umbilicus or navel that you have, it's the region at the 10th intercostal space, and as we said, that the 12th one, which is called subcostal, it's under the 12th ribs, and it's distributing to the wall of the abdomen and inguinal region. So then they have their own division that we said, that the lateral cutaneous and anterior cutaneous nerve. So in this preparation, I'm going to show you the lumbar plexus, and as I mentioned, the lumbar plexus is formed by the union of the ventral branch of the spinal cord, the segments L1, L2, L3, L4, and sometimes they are receiving some fiber from the thoracic spinal segment T12. This lumbar plexus, its supply is located in the lumbar region. According to its name, mainly it's located in the relation with the psoas major. For your orientation in this preparation, I'm going to show you, this is the diaphragm. So we turn it upward, then we are in the abdominal cavity. Here is the inferior vena cava. This is the abdominal aorta that at the level of L4 is divided to the left and the right common iliac arteries. Here is the renal vein, and here is the another renal vein, and here is the kidney. If you remember the posterior relation of the kidney, it was the nerves of the lumbar plexus that I'm going to show you. So the posterior relation of the kidney was the diaphragm. So this is the part of the diaphragm, and also the 12 and rib number 12 and 11, and some nerves that they were mentioned as hypogastric and ilioinguinal. So now I'm going to retract the kidney. So here, and then now we are looking at the branches of the lumbar plexus. So lumbar plexus, as we mentioned, is the network of the nerve fiber that is generally they are supplying the skin and muscles of the lower limb. Not all of them, but some of them. Here it's located at this region of the psoas major. So here we have the psoas minor, which is variable. It can not be exist, or it can be very small. In this case, here is the psoas minor is very well seen here, and here is the psoas major. So this lumbar plexus, according to the relation of the psoas major, we are going to discuss, and it's within the substance of this psoas major is located. And this plexus, as I mentioned, is formed by the ventral branch of the spinal cord segment L1 till L4, and sometimes is receiving the contribution of the thoracic spinal segment from the spinal cord segment T12 as a subcostal nerve, which is, we can see it under the 12th, the rib number 12. Here is the rib number 12, the last rib, and under that it's this nerve which is called subcostal nerve. The lumbar plexus, it gives generally the 6 major branches that one by one we are going to discuss. The first one that you can see it here, and I'm catching it by a pincet, it's called the iliohypogastric nerve. Iliohypogastric nerve, it's arising from the spinal cord segment L1. It can receive some fiber from T12, so in different literature they are variable. Sometimes they call it L1, sometimes they call it L1 and T12, but the main segment is L1, and this is the first major branch of the lumbar plexus. So this is the pathway. It's going toward the iliac crest, downward, and it's crossing the quadratus lumborum muscle, and it goes to the posterior abdominal wall, as you see, and it's perforating the transversus abdominis muscle. So, and it's innervating. So it means that it has most of the ventral branch. It has the mixed fiber. It means that the motoric innervation. So it means that the motoric innervation is innervating the muscles of the abdomen, which are the internal oblique and transversus abdominis, and the sensory fiber, which is innervating the posterolateral region of the gluteal region, of the skin of the gluteal region, and in part of the pubic region. So this is the sensory innervation of this muscle, which is the posterolateral region of the gluteal region, and the part of the pubic skin is innervated by this nerve. So the second nerve of the lumbar plexus is this nerve, which is a little bit smaller than the iliohypogastric. It's called ilioinguinal nerve. Ilioinguinal nerve also is arising from the segment L1, and it has the same anatomical course of the iliohypogastric nerve that we mentioned it. but it's located a little bit lower. So it means that it's crossing through the quadratus lumborum. Then it's directed downward toward the superficial ring of the inguinal canal. And then it passed through it, and it's supplying the motoric innervation of the muscles of the anterior abdominal wall. It means that the internal oblique and the transversus abdominis muscle. And also it has a sensory fiber. It means that it's a mixed nerve. So the sensory fiber it's innervating the skin in the superior and somehow the anteromedial part of the thigh, the upper part of the thigh and anteromedial part of the thigh. And in the male also is supplying the skin at the region of the root of the penis and the anterior part of the scrotum, this nerve ilioinguinal. In a female that we don't have penis, so we have the sensory innervation of this nerve. The area that is this nerve is innervating, it's in female, it's around the mons pubis and the labia majora. So till now we have these two nerve, that the iliohypogastric, which is stronger, and the ilioinguinal, which is downward and it's weaker, and they are these two nerves. They are together with this subcostal nerve. They are the posterior relation of the kidney. The next nerve of the lumbar plexus is this nerve. This nerve, it's called the lateral cutaneous nerve of the thigh. This lateral cutaneous nerve of the thigh, when you say the terminology, the lateral cutaneous, it means that it's a pure sensory or sensitive nerve. It means that according to its name and function, it's the sensory innervation of the lateral aspect of the thigh, and they are entering to the thigh, and it's going toward the lateral part of the inguinal ligament. So this is the anterior superior iliac spine. Here it's the, if you see, here is the inguinal ligament, which is going toward the pubic tubercle. We said that this is not a true ligament, it's the continuation of the aponeurosis of the abdominal muscle. This nerve, the lateral cutaneous nerve, it's going toward the lateral aspect of this inguinal ligament, which is nearby the anterior superior iliac spine in this region. This nerve, it's arising from the segment L2, L3, and it doesn't have any motoric function. It's a pure sensory for the lateral, the skin of the lateral aspect, and somehow the anterolateral aspect of the thigh till to the knee region. So this is the lateral cutaneous nerve of the thigh. Till now, to recognize the nerves of the lumbar plexus, the iliohypogastric and the ilioinguinal, so they are located lateral to this psoas major and above the iliacus muscle. This is the iliacus muscle, and this is the psoas minor, and here is the psoas major. Then this is the iliacus that they are joining together, and they make the iliopsoas muscle that they are passing through the muscular compartment of the under the inguinal ligament. So the iliohypogastric and ilioinguinal, they are above the iliac crest, but on the surface, on the anterior surface of the iliacus muscle lateral to the psoas major, you can find this nerve, which is called the lateral cutaneous nerve of the thigh. Then the next nerve that I'm going to discuss is this nerve, and this nerve is it's located on the surface or anterior surface of the of the psoas major muscle. And this is called the genitofemoral nerve. This genitofemoral nerve, it's exactly whenever you want to find it, it has the anterior relation with the psoas major muscle. So here, and it's called the genitofemoral nerve because quickly is divided to the femoral branch and the genital branch. So the lateral is the femoral and the medial is the genital branches, and it's arising from the segment also L1, L2, this genitofemoral nerve, and the function, it's the genital branch that is going medially. It goes to the scrotum and is innervating the motoric function of the cremaster muscle. As we said, the cremaster, it's the skeletal muscle and of the scrotum, and it has a synonym of the layer of the anterior abdominal wall for the internal oblique abdominal muscle and transversalis abdominis muscle. So the genitofemoral nerve is responsible for the motoric innervation of the cremaster muscle. The sensory function, the genital branch also is innervating the skin of the anterior part of the scrotum in male, and the skin in female, it's innervating the skin over the mons pubis, and synonymous of the scrotum in female is the labia majora, which is also is innervated by the genitofemoral nerve. The femoral branch is the skin. The femoral branch on is innervating the skin of the upper part of the anterior region of the thigh. So this is the genitofemoral nerve. So once more, the iliohypogastric and ilioinguinal, they are lateral to the psoas major. They are going above the iliac crest. On the surface of the iliacus, the lateral cutaneous nerve of the thigh, on the surface or anterior surface of the psoas major, it's the genitofemoral nerve. You can find it. And then we are reaching to the very important nerve, which is called the femoral nerve. So next and very important nerve of the lumbar plexus, which is the strongest nerve of the lumbar plexus, is this nerve, which is called femoral nerve. Femoral nerve is arising from the segment L2, L3, L4 from the spinal cord segments, and you can find it in the lumbar region. That the femoral nerve, it runs from the lateral aspect of the psoas major, which is this muscle. It's going downward and it goes between iliacus and psoas major. So always you can find in the fissure between the psoas major and iliacus, you can find this strong nerve, which is called the femoral nerve. Then the femoral nerve, it goes under the inguinal ligament. We said that here is the inguinal ligament. It goes under the inguinal ligament and it's entering to the muscular compartment. We said that at the muscular compartment we have the junction of the iliacus and psoas major, which is coming to the muscular compartment laterally. It's called the iliopsoas, and to this muscular compartment you can see that it's coming out the femoral nerve as well, and this is location, it's the laterally from the vascular compartment, which is here under the inguinal ligament, and they are passing, as you see, the femoral artery, which is here. Here is cutted, and the femoral vein, which is here. So in the vascular compartment, for recapitulation, here it's the most medial structure, is the deep inguinal lymph node, is the largest lymph node, then is vein, and then is the femoral artery, the femoral vein and femoral artery. And here it's the region that the greater saphenous vein is draining to the femoral vein. So lateral to this vascular compartment is the place of the exit of the femoral nerve. As you see, if I move it, so you can see that the continuation of the femoral nerve under the inguinal ligament in the muscular compartment, which is together with the iliopsoas muscle. After a short course, usually the femoral nerve it's giving the sensitive branches, which is called the anterior cutaneous branch of the thigh, and according to its name, it's supplying the anteromedial part of the skin of the thigh. It's supplied by this nerve, and usually after this course under the inguinal ligament, it's divided to the anterior and posterior division or the branches. So the anterior division, it gives this anterior cutaneous nerve that we said that is supplying the skin of the thigh and the anteromedial part, the ara nervina that I showed it to you. I showed it in the theoretical part, and the posterior division, which is giving the branches, the motoric branches for the quadriceps femoris, the foreheads of the quadriceps femoris. This is the rectus femoris and vastus medialis, vastus lateralis, vastus medialis, and vastus intermedius. And the anterior branch or anterior division that it's supplying the skin, the anteromedial part of the skin, but also it's supplying the sartorius, and also it's giving the branch to this muscle, which is called pectineus. The pectineus, if you remember, it was the diploneural muscle. It means that it has a double innervation, one innervation from the femoral nerve, and the other innervation is from the obturator nerve that I'm going to discuss. Regarding the femoral nerve, so in this case that the femoral nerve, it's supplying the muscles of the anterior compartment of the thigh. So I recommend you to revise the video of the lower limb about the muscles and the innervation of the muscles, that they are the muscles of the flexors of the hip and the extensors of the knee joint, that they are important for the motoric function of this femoral nerve. And the posterior division of the femoral nerve is saphenous nerve. The saphenous nerve is very important nerve and is branch of the femoral nerve, that it's supplying the skin of the medial part of the leg and the foot. It's innervated by this nerve, as you see here. It's passing together. This is the saphenous nerve. This saphenous nerve, it's continuous and it's passing together with the this is the saphenous nerve, and here is passing together with the greater saphenous vein. So greater saphenous vein and saphenous nerve, they have the same pathway in the medial aspect of the leg and medial aspect of the foot. The greater saphenous vein, as you see, is ascending up and it's draining to the femoral vein. Here, this saphenous nerve is coming from the posterior division of the femoral nerve, that it's going toward the adductor canal, but before the adductor hiatus, it's continue downward, and it goes to the medial aspect of the leg, and it's inferior to the knee region. It gives the infrapatellar nerve as well, and as we said, that it's supplying the skin of the medial aspect of the leg and the foot. the anterior division of the femoral nerve is that is supplying the anteromedial aspect of the thigh region. So this is all about the femoral nerve, and the next important nerve of the lumbar plexus, and the last one, and it's the only nerve of the lumbar plexus that is passing medial to the lumbar plexus, and this is in dissection course. It's very important. If somebody asks you to find the obturator nerve, this nerve is called obturator nerve. So always you find the psoas major, and you know that the obturator nerve is medially to the psoas major. So the only nerve of the lumbar plexus that is located medial to the psoas major. So a little bit, if you press the obturator nerve, here is the genitofemoral nerve that is in the surface of the psoas major. So if I press it, then immediately you can catch the obturator nerve, which is here. I hope it's seen in the video. So here it's the obturator nerve. So once more, if you want to find in dissection the obturator nerve is the only branch of the lumbar plexus that is passed medially to the psoas major. So here is the psoas major, here is the minor, and here is the major again. So you catch the psoas major, and you put it a little bit laterally, and you catch the obturator nerve. Here is the obturator nerve. The obturator nerve, we mentioned it in the video of the lower limb. So here I can show it to you and elevated it by the pincet here. So this nerve, it's arising from the segment again, the L2, L3, L4. So this nerve, it has a mixed fiber, so it means that it has a motoric fiber which is innervating mostly the medial compartment of the thigh. It means that all abductors and together with the gracilis, be careful again. It's important that this abductor magnus and pectineus, they have double innervation. One of the nerve is obturator for pectineus, another nerve is the femoral nerve, and for the adductor magnus, another nerve is the sciatic nerve. The sensory innervation of the obturator nerve, it's the innervating the skin of the medial aspect of the thigh. So the course of this nerve, as we said, that is receiving the fiber from the segment L2, L3, L4, and it's going and descending through between the medial aspect of the psoas major, and it travels posteriorly to the common iliac artery. So here is the common iliac artery, and posterior to that, it's the obturator nerve that is going on the posterior to this artery, to the pelvic wall, and then it goes to the obturator foramen. I don't know if it is seen here, the obturator foramen. So downward, here is the rectus abdominis, and here you can see the pathway of the obturator nerve. Here I elevate it, and here it's exactly before that it entered to the obturator foramen. Once more here to the obturator foramen here, together with the obturator vessels. This nerve then it's going to the medial aspect of the thigh. In the femoral region, you can see that it's on the surface of the pectineus. It's going and is innervating partially this muscle, and then immediately at the level of this pectinal muscle, it's then downward, it's dividing to the anterior division and posterior division. So this anterior division, then it's perforating the fascia, the fascia lata, and it's continue as a cutaneous branch of the obturator nerve. The posterior division, it's going through the obturator externus muscle, and it's traveling anteriorly to reach the adductor magnus. This obturator nerve, as we said, that it's innervating the the motoric innervation of the medial compartment of the thigh, except the part of the adductor magnus which is innervated by the branches of the sciatic nerve. So this is the motoric and the cutaneous branch of the obturator nerve, supplying the skin of the middle part of the medial aspect of the thigh. So once more for the lumbar plexus, I revised the anatomical position of the nerves. So the key for you, the lumbar plexus is located on the psoas major muscle. So the nerve that immediately under the rib number 12, it's the subcostal nerve. It's arising from the segment T12, and because it's the last rib, under that is called the subcostal nerve. This is the anterior branch of the spinal nerve from the segment T12. Then under that, it's the iliohypogastric that usually is stronger, and the ilioinguinal nerve, which is weaker. Then we are going on the surface of the iliacus muscle, which is this nerve, and it's called the lateral cutaneous nerve of the thigh. It's the only muscle that has a pure sensory fiber from the branches of the lumbar plexus. Then this strong nerve, that it's the femoral nerve, and is located the fissure and at the fissure between the iliacus and the psoas major. Then is this nerve that is on the surface of the psoas major, and this is the genitofemoral nerve, that it's divided to the genital and the femoral branches. And finally the obturator nerve, that is the only nerve that is medial to the psoas major. It's this nerve, obturator nerve. So this is all about the branches of the lumbar plexus.